This is Delhi. Please stand by for our next program.
This is All India Radio. You will now hear comments from the press. The Statesman, in its editorial titled Beyond Home, says it would be rather too simplistic to iterate that Hong Kong has reached a grim pass. The clouds over the island nation are still more dense on the anniversary of the 2014 umbrella movement. China's People's Liberation Army has reinforced its presence in the stillness of the night, and the prominent pro-democracy activists have been arrested on the 4th anniversary of the upheaval. After 2.5 months, the confrontation between the authorities and protesters appears further than ever from a peaceful resolution. As many as 1 in 4 inhabitants have taken to the streets, and this week, 2.5 months after the movement began, it became the longest running political protest since Britain's handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997. But the longer the demonstrations go on, the harder it has become to see a way out. This month, following the occupation of the airport, both police and activists had softened the tactics. The resulting period of relative peace, which included a march by 1.7 million people, afforded the authorities an opportunity to look for a way out of the impasse. Far from it, as it turned out, the violence has escalated, exemplified by a policeman firing a live round during clashes for the first time, and demonstrators on the streets lobbing Molotov cocktails. A ban on what was expected to be another huge march on Saturday has raised tensions further, despite hopes that a compromise could still be found. There are suggestions that the authorities might invoke the Emergency Regulations Ordinance, a colonial-era law giving the chief executive sweeping powers of censorship, suppression of publications and communications, arrests, deportations, and property seizures. The chief cause of surprise must be that the legislation on deportation to China, which ignited the conflagration, has been kept in abeyance by the chief executive Carrie Lam. The durability of this movement owes at least as much to its opponents as to its supporters. Despite the unfounded accusations of foreign meddling, this crisis was arguably masterminded by China. But Beijing's threats, Carrie Lam's initial intransigence, and police brutality have so far fired up those already involved and brought more into the fold. Ms. Lam says it is her responsibility to continue to hold the fort, which is disintegrating around her. The Asian Age, in its editorial titled Hard Brexit, Undemocratic Rights, Boris Johnson has placed himself on a perilous path of muzzling Parliament in order to push through with his agenda of hard Brexit by October 31st. The EU is against such a way of UK exiting the Union without a deal, and many Britons are also opposing a withdrawal being staged in a manner as may affect common life. And yet the new UK Prime Minister appears hell-bent on sending the message to EU that he is willing to suspend Parliament up to October 14 in order to make possible the detachment, ostensibly on xenophobic grounds, from Europe. What his current plans will do is to give less time to the Remainers and those who wish to leave the EU with a deal to create trouble for his Brexit. What Johnson has done in declaring a holiday for Parliament for a couple of more weeks than normal may be legitimate, even if it is stretching constitutional propriety to the extent of dragging the Queen into politics, much against the traditions of a unique constitutional monarchy in a democracy. The extreme cynicism seen in such manoeuvring of a pillar of British democracy as its Parliament and its unwritten constitution is what is worrying. The Asian Age, in its editorial titled Mergers No Answer, Kickstart Investment Rights, two figures released this week, namely GDP growth slipping to a 6-year low at 5% against 5.8% in the last quarter, and 10 public sector banks merging to form 4 big banks, shows the government has lost its grip on the economy. In the case of the PSU, public sector undertaking banks, mergers are not the answer to problems that besiege them. What is required is for banks to be freed from the stranglehold of the government, which is the largest shareholder. PSUs are burdened with funding the giveaways and SOPs announced by the government. Another reform needed is accountability. The fact that most of the frauds related to advances shows that either due diligence was not done by the bank officials concerned or that they were complicit with borrowers in cheating the bank. Either way, there should be accountability. The crying need in the short term is for government to kickstart investment and undertake infrastructure projects on a large scale and create employment. It also needs to give a major push to the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, particularly in rural India. Those were the comments from the press presented to you by the News Services Division of All India Radio.